They didn't come in their Easter finery, but we had a full house. That was the Reverend Joseph L. Walsted's description of Easter Sunday services at Hillcrest Presbyterian Church. The church came through the Good Friday earthquake without damage. There were no casualties among its congregation. The disaster was felt far and wide. The pastor and his wife and children were also unhurt. Some families in the congregation lost their homes. 3 of the Walstad's children were playing on a hillside and saw their school slide into a crevice which opened up a short distance away. The Walstads also have a youngster away at college. The Reverend Mr. Walstad was in the study of the church when the earthquake hit. Leaders of a dozen federal agencies conferred today on emergency action to deal with the Alaskan earthquake damage, now estimated unofficially at $350 to $500 million. The vast losses from Friday's quake and resulting tidal waves and fires dwarf the federal funds already available for disaster relief, making it almost certain that Congress will be asked for special assistance legislation. Though the kind and amount of aid could not yet be fixed, senators from many parts of the nation voluntarily announced on the Senate floor they would support anything that can be done. Edward A. McDermott, director of the President's Office of Emergency Planning, called a meeting of agency heads concerned. He described the tremendous devastation viewed by him on a flying weekend trip to the stricken state. McDermott, named by President Johnson to lead and coordinate the disaster effort, reported by telephone yesterday to the President at Johnson City, Texas. Johnson was described as affirming that everything necessary must be done. Although McDermott's office declined to set a dollar figure on damages at this early stage of the appraisal, it was learned from other sources that the government is using as a working estimate a sum between $350 and $500 million. Agency sources said McDermott told the closed high-level meeting that many structures which look sound from the outside actually are so weakened from the Earth's upheaval that they are unsound, unsafe, and in some cases, virtual total losses. Here he's speaking in reference to buildings in Anchorage which have recently been completed, or some of the major structures in Anchorage which on the outside appear to be affected only slightly, but inside, and the structural damage leads the official estimates to say that only many of them are total losses. He also stated that an estimate of physical damage must be a wide understatement of the actual economic loss because such basic payroll industries such as fishing and canning have been virtually wiped out by the destruction of docks, canneries, boats, railroad lines, and warehouses. The state's own ability to assist has been dealt a disastrous blow because of the anticipated drastic shrinkage of revenues from income and property taxes. This is due in part to a provision of the new federal tax law which permits taxpayers to deduct from the 1963 taxes any casualty losses which may have occurred in 1964, subject to the $100 deductible provision of the new law. He called on the federal agencies to give Alaskan disaster relief top priority attention at the highest level of administration, meeting under the direct leadership of cabinet officers and agency chiefs rather than at the second or third echelon staff level. Among those attending the session were representatives of the Interior, Agriculture, Treasury, Defense, and Welfare Departments, Army Corps of Engineers, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Housing and Home, Finance Agency, Federal Aviation Agency, Small Business Administration, Office of Civil Defense, Internal Revenue Service, and the Budget Bureau. The area within 5 miles radius of Merrill Tower in Anchorage has been declared disaster area in accordance with the Federal Air Regulation 91.91, except for landing and takeoff of aircraft. No aircraft will operate below 2,000 feet mean sea level. All turns necessary for landing and takeoff shall be away from the area bounded by Elmendorf Air Force Base on the north, Seward Highway on the east, Northern Lights Boulevard on the south, and a line 1 mile off the Anchorage shoreline on the west. Pilots having a need to operate contrary to this notice can make a request for exception from Civil Defense by calling Anchorage Flight Service Station. From the State District Engineers, legal loads allowed on Connect Bridge are as follows. Autos must be 200 feet apart at 15 miles per hour. Trucks, one at a time at 5 miles per hour. Make no sudden starts or stops on the bridge. All state division heads are to meet with Governor Egan at the Anchorage City Public Safety Building in the Judges' Chambers at 5 p.m. this afternoon. The State Civil Defense announced that Kodiak has 6 dead with bodies found and 14 missing and presumed dead and 2 injured. And a series of tidal waves had a more devastating effect on Seward than any of the huge forces attacking her. The first of 3 waves struck about a half hour after the earthquake's first shock. They tossed railroad freight cars thousands of yards, but their most vicious action was carrying raging fires from the oil slicks let out of bursting storage tanks. The fire razed everything along the dock area. About 400 infantrymen and engineers from Fort Richardson are in Seward assisting in emergency operations and cleanup of the port city. Boats and boxcars were the sort of shrapnel used by the waves in their barrage of Seward. Trader boats, tank cars, marker buoys, and ice were thrown at structures rimming the bay. Every major industry of Seward has been destroyed. Fires blooming out of the oil storage tanks dress the town in the color of mourning. All cars have black top surfaces. Dogs running the streets are soot-painted. The men working around the clock in the fire and debris are smoke-grimed and gray. The earthquakes opened fissures and rearranged the land extensively. Master Sergeant Lester Smith of the U.S. Army's recreation area in Seward said 300 feet of his frontage are now part of Resurrection Bay. Private First Class Pepe Fuchs, a native of Peru on duty at the recreation area, said he was watching a train run along the tracks from the mess hall window at about 5:30 p.m. We saw the train, the whole train with brand new cars on it, and it got tossed into the water like nothing was involved. The whole train just gets flipped into the water, and the bridge it was on was gone, and the tracks are hopping like rubber bands. He said he and his buddies went across a parking lot outside the mess hall. Across the parking lot was a civil housing area, and as soon as the men reached it, they began organizing and aiding in civil evacuation. Asked if the Holocaust had terrified him, Fuchs replied, "No, we were just too busy." The townspeople and soldiers were moving instinctively toward the hospital and high ground when the waves tore in below. Staff Sergeant William Yates of Kannapolis, North Carolina, got out of his car when he saw the water was beating him to the high ground. He took off on foot, later finding his brand-new automobile a total loss. U.S. Army Alaska soldiers stationed in Seward were the first at work in the Seward disaster. Seeing those uniforms at work out of nowhere was a great surprise and a great relief, said Mrs. Paul Penter of Seward. Seward's National Guard unit was encamped on Fort Richardson near Anchorage for their annual 2-week active duty training when the disaster struck their hometown. They were flown back to Seward to work with the military already in the area. That's a composite of many varied news releases here at KFQD's Communication Central. It's 4 minutes past 4. This is KFQD Anchorage, operating at a capacity 10,000 watts at 7:30 on the dial, relaying our transmission to KFRB in Fairbanks. In about 11 minutes, I repeat, in about 11 minutes from now, KFQD will reverse its transmission to Fairbanks and receive transmission from KFRB for those of you in the Anchorage area with relatives, loved ones, and friends in the Fairbanks area. Is the City Civil Defense Communication Center ready with another release?
Civil Defense Headquarters. The Greater Anchorage Health District, in conjunction with other health agencies, wishes to warn the public against the purchase and use of milk and milk products from unapproved sources. Milk and milk products in non-standard or unlabeled containers such as gallon jars or obtained from places other than normal retail outlets should be considered suspect. Milk from non-certified dairies and farms is always a potential health hazard. A disaster such as experienced by Anchorage and the outlying districts increases the potential hazard from the above-mentioned sources. A survey of farms and creameries supplying the Anchorage area has shown that all certified sources are producing and delivering good, wholesome milk and milk products. The milk industry is taking extraordinary precautionary measures to maintain normal milk standards and to prevent any contamination. Non-certified sources are unable to meet the health requirements considered standard under normal circumstances and therefore become a threat to public health at this time. Lack of potable water, cows not tested for disease, unclean and unapproved premises, lack of refrigeration and unsanitary containers for delivery make all bootleg milk a poor risk. We have information from the municipal court to the effect that no trials will be held in municipal court until further notice. No traffic arraignments will be held until April 6th at 1:30 p.m. We have a request from the Magistrate's Court. Magistrate Richard Collins, please contact City Court immediately. We have some more information from the City Civil Defense. Executone Communications is back in business providing all types of communication services. They may be contacted at Federal 33021. Here is some more information from City Civil Defense. Larry Eastland, City Superintendent of Public Works, reports that they are having difficulty dealing with the excess sewage in the area of 8th Avenue and K Street. They request that you please restrict use of sewage facilities until further notice north of 9th Avenue to 3rd Avenue. That's north of 9th Avenue to 3rd Avenue and anywhere west of Gamble. This is Jeannie Waite returning you to Communications Central.
Thank you, Jeannie, very much. And anytime something arises at the Civil Defense headquarters in the city, why, we'll be right there with you. You're still receiving our Civil Defense Anchorage headquarters on your headphones now, aren't you, Bob? Oh, yes. Good. We have some messages now that have come in, Ron, while you were doing the news. And I'll pass them along now, right after a reminder that at 4:15, we'll be handling the traffic from Fairbanks in a reverse process. Until just a few moments ago, Fairbanks was monitoring us. I believe they still are. If you're hearing that increased signal, they are. Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, then they still are monitoring us. But in just a few moments, the process will be reversed, and we will then receive from them messages from your friends and loved ones there. And I'm sure you'll want to be listening, though. That's at 4:15 in just 7 minutes from now. So in the next 7 minutes, we'll try and get through this information we have. First of all, this is KFQD in Anchorage, Alaska. Clear channel, 10,000 watts, 730 kilocycles. The voice of Civil Defense, acting as your Civil Defense base station during this emergency operation. We'd like to have you know that any information that you hear on KFQD is authoritative from the sources of Civil Defense, just as the information is that is being broadcast over Armed Forces Radio on Elmendorf. Jeannie, you have something for us at Civil Defense?
Schools.
All right, go ahead. You're on the air, Jeannie.
Okay, thank you. Schools will still be closed tomorrow, that's Tuesday, and until further notice. Teachers who have not contacted their principals should do so as soon as possible and continue to keep in touch with them. 4 survey teams are now examining the school buildings, including those in Chugiak and Eagle River, to determine whether they are safe for occupancy. Representatives of architectural firms which designed each school are accompanying the teams. Staff members of East and West high schools are making plans for double shifting at East and hope to be in operation early next week. Pending survey team results, some elementary and junior high schools may be in session late this week or early next week. Here's a notice to all Anchorage School District principals and other personnel. All public announcements you wish to make via radio or newspaper should be relayed to Anita McGrath in the administration building, who will in turn send them on Civil Defense. Anita McGrath may be contacted at Fairfax 24942. We'll return you now to Communications Central.
Okay, Judy. That's it, right? Thank you very much. That was the latest report from Civil Defense Headquarters, City Civil Defense Headquarters. All right, as I was saying, that this is KFQD, and our information is coming to you from Civil Defense Communications. The weatherman says for Anchorage and vicinity, considerable high cloudiness this afternoon through Tuesday. The high this afternoon will be in the mid-30s, the low tonight 15 to 20 degrees. The Weather Bureau has begun operating from temporary headquarters at Elmendorf Air Force Base, and every time it is possible for them to come out with a revised weather picture, why, they're doing so. So we will have the next one whenever it's possible for them to report to us. Mary Robinson has been able to contact, has reported in with the district engineers, so those of you who are going around looking for Mary and passing along our message about getting in touch with them, you can put that one in your file, too. Colby Dixon, your mobile is all right. Colby Dixon, your mobile unit is all right. George Sanders and Pete Lazaros, call the Salvation Army at Broadway 23916. Broadway 23916, and ask for Ed Davidson. The Anchorage Bedding Company at 931 East 6th Avenue will be open tomorrow, Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, and there's plenty of stock available. Mr. Octoby Hansen, Mr. Octoby Hansen, please call Federal 32564. There's a telegram for you. Federal 32564. Bob, in just about one moment, we're going to go to a 2-minute musical bridge for the transfer of communications between here and Fairbanks. So in about 45 seconds, we'll go into a 2-minute musical bridge. We'll make the announcement at that time. All right. I'll keep going until you say to stop. Grace Leffel has been contacted. She is located now at the Jacksonry Post, number 1 of the American Legion. Let's see. Glenna Steinman. Contact Jim Broman at Broadway 49735 sometime tonight. Glenna Steinman. B&R Builders is open for business. Safeway stores are open for business. Travelers Inn is open, normal business. Will the woman who called about Don Howell please call Broadway 70601 and give them the information? The woman who called about Don Howell, that's Broadway 70601. Give them the information. Okay, Bob, we're going to go into a 2-minute musical bridge now, and during this 2-minute, in exactly 2 minutes, we will join Fairbanks. Okay, Ron. Here in the Fairbanks area, KFRB received offers of assistance almost immediately after notification of the disaster. We received offers ranging from complete generator units offered by the Golden Valley Electric Company all the way down to 24 lollipops volunteered by an 8-year-old girl. That's all she had, she told us, but at any rate, she was willing to share them. The children of Anchorage were certainly, of Fairbanks, were also on the phone. We received several offers of clothing. One girl, I don't know whether she was put up to this by an angry parent, but she did offer us her little brother. However, we didn't need that, really. The Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce and the JCs are very, very busy locating homes and clothing for possible evacuees. Everyone is standing by. They're assuming that we may be needed even more than we have been. The officers and the men and the wives of Alton Air Force Base called within 3 hours and said they had arranged clothing and bedding for some 300 possible people that may be needed. KFRB, of course, was flooded with calls, many from relatives and friends of those caught in the earthquake. And we, of course, were very much in the same boat as they were at the time, not knowing the extent of the disaster. First reports that came in indicated very, very severe disruption of communications in the area. We were unable to do very much about it until later. And now, of course, we are very pleased to have this opportunity to send back some personal messages to you at KFQD.
This is Lowell Purcell, and these are the messages that are to go to Anchorage. We will then monitor KFQD and be broadcasting with the facilities of KFQD in Anchorage to try to get some replies back to the folks up here in Fairbanks. First message goes to the Paul DeClos family, D-U, capital C-L-O-S family, at 5005 Cambridge Way in Spenard. This comes from the Kohlmeyer family here in Fairbanks. Hope you're all fine, and they're anxious to hear from you. Otto and Beth Snyder, OK, S-C-H-N-E-I-D-E-R. Otto and Beth Snyder, the Ted Patterson family would like to know. The Snyder's address is 1505 West 29th Street, Spenard. Otto and Beth Snyder. People here in Fairbanks would like to know if you're all right. Their address in Anchorage is 1505 West 29th Street, Spenard. To KFQD, would you please message concerning Octavia Hampson? This comes from William Humphreys here in Fairbanks. Our friends at KFQD, if you've heard anything about an Octavia Hampson, William Humphreys here in Fairbanks, we would like to know. Next message is for Louis Bardwell and family. The message is, hope everything is okay. Please write and tell us how you are. This again comes from Bill Humphreys. To Mrs. Knudsen at Turnagain Children's Home. If you need anything, contact Jim Wilson here in Fairbanks at 352-7162. That's 352-7162 here in Fairbanks. He will try to get you the supplies you need. And Mrs. Knudsen at Turnagain Children's Home. Concerning your needs, contact Jim Wilson here in Fairbanks. To Senator Vance Phillips in Anchorage, please contact if we can help. This comes from Myrna Wilson at Eielson Air Force Base. From Myrna Wilson at Eielson Air Force Base. From Sister Betty Stewart here in Fairbanks, Robert Foster of Soldovia, are you all right? Robert Foster of Soldovia. This comes from your sister Betty Stewart here in Fairbanks. She's heard no word from you, wonders if you are okay. Mr. and Mrs. Paul Lindsay of Anchorage and Mr. and Mrs. Chris Brooks of Sheridan. The Kennys want to know if you're all right. The Kennys here in Fairbanks want to know if you're okay. Mr. and Mrs. Paul Lindsay and Mr. and Mrs. Chris Brooks. Elizabeth Phillips would like to know if Mr. Willie Kidwell in Anchorage is okay. He lives at 527 East 13th Street. Willie Kidwell, 527 East 13th Street in Anchorage. Elizabeth Phillips, your cousin here in Fairbanks, would like to know if you're all right. John Burns and family from Fairbanks are now in Anchorage. He is working the...
During the time of the great earthquake of 1964. And for the next few minutes, we would like to do, instead of a discussion involving what you should do and what you should not do in regard to your particular conduct during the crisis, and also I want to avoid any particular emergency messages, but I want to offer you a kind of first-person reminiscence on the part of an Alaskan about all the things that happened since a little after 5:30 on Friday. Well, in the first place, we weren't even here when it happened. As nearly as I can determine, I was in Tokyo. And as some of you were told on last week's News in Depth, we went on a trade tour to Tokyo. We left here at 6:15 on Friday morning from Anchorage International Airport with Northwest Airlines, and we were in company with a number of other Alaskans who were intent on doing the best for the state of Alaska in the way of promoting trade with the Orient. I'm referring to Mr. William Bishop, manager of Alaska operations for the Richfield Oil Company, Mr. William Wagaman, the Usabelli Coal Company, William Moran, president of the First National Bank down in Ketchikan, Mr. Clyde Courtnage, director of the Alaska office of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and Walter Hickel, president of the Hickel Investment Company and other firms here, and Don Dickey, manager of the Alaska State Chamber of Commerce. Also intended to go to Tokyo, but they didn't quite make it because of the tragedy in Alaska. Charles West, president of West Tours, and Arthur Woodley, president of Pacific Northern Airlines. Now, all of us went over to Tokyo, and we arrived there at about 10:15 in the morning, and we had never been to Japan before, of course, and we were tremendously impressed right away after clearing through customs with the number of people involved, the number of people we had to fight our way through, Saturday morning traffic in Tokyo, and I think I must have seen all of 10 million of those people. And we got to our hotel, and we were about to have lunch. Then, one of our group, Bill Wagaman from Fairbanks, had an emergency telephone call from Alaska. Of course, we felt sorry for Bill. We didn't know what the story was, but we were apprehensive in his behalf. It was a while before the call was placed, and finally, he told us later that he had been advised by telephone from Fairbanks of the death of Emil Usabelli, a pioneer mining man of Alaska, who was killed at their coal mine, I believe at Suntrana. A piece of heavy equipment rolled over on him. At any rate, during the course of this conversation, Mr. Wogman was told, just wait a minute, we're having an earthquake here. And later the connection was cut off, and they put him back on after a few minutes, and he was told that they had an earthquake, but apparently it did no damage there in Fairbanks. So this was the first intimation that we Alaskans had that an earthquake was taking place. And then we, being Alaskans and knowing that earthquakes are something we sort of take in our stride, at least in a mild form, we were not too shaken by this information until the Japanese English-speaking radio started giving the word that a serious earthquake had hit the state of Alaska. And then, of course, we became extremely curious. The first thing we did was to call from our Okura Hotel to the Associated Press, and the story that the bureau chief of the Associated Press in Tokyo read to me over the telephone last Friday was something that made my hair stand on end. And from then on, it was a battle of communications, trying to determine precisely what had happened in Alaska, what was the extent of the area, also the extent of the damages, what was the situation in respect to our families, and also to the businesses that we operate in Alaska. This information was rather slow forthcoming. Don Anden, a manager of KFAR radio in Fairbanks, was in a particularly good position, not being in the middle of the earthquake, but somewhat on the fringes, and he placed a call to me in Tokyo and was able to give me the information that all of our group was looking for, and a second call also confirmed additional information that we requested, so we were pretty well supplied with information that was very distressing to us at that time. We also were indebted to Lieutenant General Raymond Reeves, commanding officer of all the armed forces in Alaska, who advised us that the situation was very serious, that our families were safe, and that we should return home at once. Of course, we made arrangements to catch the next plane, which was a plane going to Seattle, and that left Tokyo on Sunday night. Now, it so happens that we spent a total of 2 Easter Sundays this year. We did this by crossing the international date line. We spent one Sunday, Sunday afternoon in Tokyo, and we had an opportunity to take a few hours while waiting for that plane to do a little shopping and also to take a tour of the Tokyo area, and we're amazed again at the tremendous sea of people. We thought we were getting over there in cherry blossom time, but actually they say we were about 2 weeks early. And however, it was early springtime, a beautiful sunshiny day, and the parks and the streets and all of the public places were just jammed with Japanese families, children and mothers and fathers, people of all ages who were enjoying the early spring Japanese sunshine. Now, in regard to the news that was received in this respect about the earthquake in Tokyo, I think that perhaps those of us living right here in Anchorage may not have the full perspective in regard to just how much world prominence this story is getting. We found very inclusive stories in all of the Japanese newspapers this past weekend. We brought some of them back with us. We saw the story on Japanese television and heard it frequently on radio. We saw pictures from Alaska that convinced us as to the seriousness of this situation. And I want to say, too, that the embassy over there was very kind to us with our problem. And we had a delegation of the Japan Chamber of Commerce, which came to our room in Tokyo and expressed their feelings of condolence about the tragedy that had taken place in our homeland. And of course, you can understand that these Japanese have a particular sympathy for people with an earthquake problem, because they've suffered in the same direction for many years on different occasions, and they were very solicitous and very courteous in this respect. Also, Lieutenant General Preston, who is the head of the armed forces, the American Armed Forces in Japan, visited with us and helped to coordinate our return to Alaska. So it happened that we spent a total of 12,000 miles traveling over the weekend, and we had 2 Easter Sundays, and I can't say that they were the happiest, but it was indeed an unusual situation. Out of the news that came from Alaska, KENI was prominent. We heard Genie Chance's voice over there on the Far East Radio Network. We also heard Don Anden. That a brief time when we were doing a little shopping, Don Anden came on the Far East Armed Forces Radio Service Network for a total of 15 minutes from Fairbanks with a summary of just what was happening in the Anchorage area particularly. And this was encouraging to us to hear news of this kind from so far away from home. And also, I would like to mention that we have arranged to come back to Japan, to go back in the fall of the year after the Olympic Games, and we feel that we've only postponed the trip that we set out for in behalf of the Alaska State Chamber of Commerce. Now I think I'd like to move on to a little more of updating from the eyewitness standpoint. We came groping in by jet to the Anchorage International Airport last night, and of course there were no facilities for unloading baggage, and it was all very dark out there. And then the cabs and the cars came right up beside the airplane, and the bags were all unloaded by hand, and you just had to make your choice and do the best you can. This led to a lot of confusion, and I saw a typical urbane tourist type who said something to the effect that this is the most outrageous thing he had ever experienced. Of course, this man didn't seem to realize that tremendous earthquake had taken place in Anchorage, and the difficult conditions that existed were exactly what we should expect. And perhaps after he saw what we saw here in Anchorage today, in the way of tremendous damage to some of our best buildings, he would better understand why all the confusion and inconvenience. There's some talking here in Anchorage today about moving the entire downtown business district. I don't know how serious that is. I think that we should all pause, not too long because there's a lot of work to do, but pause for a little while and consider the fact that if we do it wrong now, we're going to live with these mistakes for decades to come. This is a time for cautious consideration, and this on the part of the citizenry to start with. They're duly elected officials who are running the different agencies here in the Anchorage area particularly, and the other stricken towns of Alaska, and also in the matter of business, every businessman. I think that the bankers, the people who are helping to work out the financing on the reconstruction of Alaska, should find themselves hard put, and we hope they come up with the right kind of answers that will give us good, progressive construction, durable construction to fit our needs and our purposes over the years, and something that will make Anchorage the kind of a city that all of us and our children for generations to come will truly be proud of. I think that Anchorage has made such a vital start on the North American continent, on the map of America, that there's no turning it back. And in some respects, it can be, at least physically, that the city will improve if we do so with proper planning. There's some evidence now of lack of early organization, which is fully understandable. And the reason for this, I would say, is simply because nobody ever dreamed of a tragedy like this hitting the Anchorage area. And even yet, some of the agencies and local organizations are beginning to grope around and trying to get squared away so that they can join hands to do the kind of a job it's going to take to get Anchorage back on the right foot again. In regard to the coverage material that is supplied particularly by Kenai Radio, I want to thank all of the agencies that have been so particularly cooperative. The Alaska Communication System has done a yeoman-like job. They have transmitted the daily programming of KENI Radio to the other principal cities of Alaska as a public service so that other anxious Alaskans can be fully informed as to what is going on in the Cook Inlet area, and also for us to relay the information about Seward and Cordova and Valdez and Kodiak and the other communities that were also stricken. When we came back to Alaska from Tokyo last night, we knew that we were in for a situation that was going to be something far less than happy or palatable. But the trip that I took with Ty Clark and Wally Hickle around town this morning was extremely disappointing, and the results of the catastrophe are even worse than we ever dreamed they could be. It seems like the best of our buildings, the proudest of our buildings, were the ones that were hardest hit and the ones that now must be replaced. And we have a feeling, too, that a lot of the damage is not superficial, that it goes even deeper. And as time goes on, we may find that there will be even more and more building casualties, particularly, turning up. For those in the other parts of Alaska who wondered about the reports of fire, we're told, and we could see, that there was very little fire. As a matter of fact, it was amazing. I don't see how the city avoided a major fire, but there was very little fire, and we can thank God for a lack of even further confusion on that basis. I would like to also mention that KENI TV and radio, of course, have tailored their schedules to this situation. And on radio, we are on a non-commercial basis, and we are running our network television now. But the major presentation, which is to be offered on KENI television and radio tonight and to the rest of the state of Alaska, is a special address by the Honorable Governor Ernest Egan. And this will be at 8 o'clock. And, of course, his subject will be on the situation that prevails as a result of the great earthquake of 1964. We hope and trust that our public officials and all those responsible for the rebuilding of Anchorage will roll up their sleeves and in good heart and with much zeal and with proper upright understanding of their motives will undertake to make of Anchorage, Alaska, and for that matter for the other Alaskan cities, something that future generations will truly appreciate. We thank you for being with us tonight. We thought we would deviate just a little bit from our usual format, and we were happy to give you a first-person impression of at least what happened to us in the last 3 days. See you tomorrow night on News in Depth. Thank you, and good evening.
Well, this is KENI in Anchorage, Alaska. The time is now 19 1/2 minutes past the hour of 6 o'clock. And we'll turn you out now again to, this is the changing of the guards here at Radio Central. So I would not know who would be out of the camper now, but we're going out to the Public Safety Building to see what is happening out there.
Yes, thank you, Otto. And we have quite a little information here, primarily concerned with the losses or the missing persons in the Turnagain area. We've had 2 lists brought to us in the last hour and a half, and since the press conference this afternoon, and we have the second list that came to us was about half the length of the first list. We went through the second list, giving the names. Now I would like to go over that first list and give you the names of the people who have been heard from. In other words, they are safe and not in trouble. Kipling Aslin of 2811 Iliamna Avenue has been heard from. Raymond J. Anderson of 2157 Marston Drive, Apartment 2 has been heard from. Robert H. Bean of 3101 Marston Drive has been heard from. Donald Blaser of 2434 Marston Drive has been heard from. John O. Beardsley, also heard from. Gerald W. Bishop, also heard from. Joe E. Crossan, Robert D. Clarkson, Peter M. Clark, all these people all right. Delaronde, Ralph W. Delaronde, all right. Opal M. Everett, all right. Hartman, Donald C. Hartman, all right. Clarence A. Hirschbach, all right. Donald Crow, also all right. Wendell Kibler, also all right. And that's all that we have on that particular list of the ones, of that portion of it. As we go through the rest of them, we'll give you the names of the people who have been heard from. I believe that's all of them, however. Then the remainder, of course, are the people who have not been heard from, and we'll give you that a little later on as a second rundown. An item here on the schools. Schools will still be closed tomorrow, Tuesday, and until further notice. Teachers who have not contacted their principals should do so as soon as possible and continue to keep in touch with them. 4 survey teams are working now examining the school buildings, including those in Chugiak and Eagle River, to determine whether they are safe for occupancy. Representatives of architectural firms which designed each school are accompanying the teams. Staff members of East and West high schools are making plans for double shifting at East and hope to be in operation early next week. Pending survey team results, some elementary and junior high schools may be in session late this week or early next week. And on the individual people who are missing, the list has gone way, way down. We have a total of 8 names on the list of individuals who are missing, unaccounted for. Hans T. On of 339 Iliamna Avenue, Fred W. Avery of Tulik Drive. These are the people out in Turnagain who lived in the Turnagain Bluff area. This is what the list is boiled down to, just 8. We'll go over it again. Hans T. On, A-U-N-E, Fred W. Avery, D.K. Albert, Kendall G. Branch, Irene Alexander Lewines, Kenneth W. Matheson, Charles E. Brann, Arneil Yeaton of 2001 Marston Drive. These are the people still missing. The rest of the long list that we had earlier this afternoon are all accounted for, and this is wonderful news. There's sadness, of course, on the part of the ones that are